Hey everyone, Warwick's here. So while I was in raid last night, PTR trees got updated on Wowhead with all the druid changes. So I made a video yesterday kind of like as a first rapid reaction to everything. I'll put that video up there so that you guys can go check that out. It is chaptered out to where if you only want to watch one particular spec, you can. Balanced druid, there wasn't a whole lot to discuss because obviously it was mostly just wanted to see the trees. I will do a video on balanced druid later. Balance and guardian druid trees are both fully updated. Feral tree has not been updated as I record this, so feral video will have to come once those trees get updated. Probably won't happen until next week because of my weekend. I have my little one, so I'll be hanging out with him this weekend. But what I wanted to do is, obviously we're going to start with guardian druid because it's one of my favorite specs, if not my favorite spec in the game. And I want to kind of talk over what they've done with the tree, what options that we might have in terms of gameplay. Obviously there's still some testing that needs to be done on PTR. And I'm sure sort of the theory crafters of the Guardian community are working on figuring out like what are going to be some of the new best builds and things of that nature. But I wanted to start with a comparison. So right above me here is the trees updated on PTR. So this is what the new class druid tree looks like and the new guardian tree looks like versus over there, that way, over here is what we're currently working with on live retail WoW. And as you can tell, the class tree rather has obviously the few extra connections that were laid out, things of that nature, but for the most part, not a lot of differences overall in the tree. A few extra shapes, few extra connections added. But like I said, the biggest thing about the druid trees themselves were that it was a point saving measure with a couple of extra talents added in that were more needed than the actual like shape and pathing and stuff like that. I think overall the shape and pathing was mostly fine, and now they've added some of the extra things into the tree that I think really help make the spec feel a little bit more rounded out. The guardian druid tree, though, as you can see, is significantly different in how they did it. It's much more a bear paw like, which is kind of funny, but the number of connections and the number of paths that you have to get to different things now is significantly increased. My initial impression upon looking at them last night after raid was over was that I liked them, but today we're going to kind of deep dive a little bit more into the tree itself and kind of talk about some early potential build paths that I kind of looked at just looking over the talents, and then also looking at some other potential viable playstyles that I kind of talked about in yesterday's video with Guardian, where there's like a Dream of Cenarius, small thrash type setup, kind of look like what that's going to look like on the surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this window out and maximize this and blow it back up to 100% and full screen this. So let's start with the class tree itself. Again, there'll be chapters if there's something that you want to look at specifically. So obviously Guardian Druid starts with Frenzied Regeneration and Thrash. Very cool. I still think that we're going to end up, obviously here's Improved Swipe. It took the place of what Swipe was in the talent tree. And of course you're taking Iron Fur, Killer Instinct. Overall, I also think you're still taking Improved Bark Skin. So that means you have 3 more points to spend. Now, one thing to notice here is that Wild Growth moved way up in the tree, and Remove Corruption is now kind of on its own thing. So if you need to be a curse removal in your party, for example, or disease removal or poison removal, sorry, for your party, you come down, you get Reduce Swift Mend, and then Remove Corruption, and that's the end. I'd like to see them maybe would have connected this talent here so that you could still go down, and I'd like to maybe have seen connections here. Like, that's the only complaint that I have. Same thing here is connect these talents together. But I think those are minor things. Those are things that can continue to be looked at as we move through the patches. But I don't think overall they are like fundamentally disappointing. I'd also like to see Sunfire attached to Remove Corruption as well. Just to add that kind of like nice little symmetry. But I think for most bear builds, you're still going to come down here and grab this because you want Astral Influence, getting the extra 3 yards on your abilities, especially in Mythic Plus, but even in Raid, if you have to go pick up ads and stuff like that, I think it's going to be very valuable. You're still going to take Thick Hide. I still think you grab Wild Charge, Soothe, and Stampeding Roar. Those are all very important abilities. You're still grabbing Improved Sunfire because you take Sunfire up here. Now you grab Improved Sunfire. You're not actually going to use Sunfire, but you need it to open up this part of the tree so that you can get down into things, get down into the sort of bottom end here. And I'll move this up because I know my chair is kind of covering it, but Protector of the Pack is basically the only talent hidden. We're not going to be taking that in any build, in the kind of the build that I'm going to be looking at least initially. Class tree will change a little bit depending on what you want to do with your spec build. Skull Bash, I still think you always take. I still think you take Matted Fur because it's your connection down here. This ability, ultimately, I like the new logo, but ultimately I think it's kind of a weak talent because the shield doesn't stand up to even one melee hit from a single mob, even in Mythic Plus, so it doesn't really do anything. It's just a connection point to allow you to grab Incap Roar, Well-Honed Instincts, and Protector of the Pack if you're building Dream of Cenarius, because Primal Fury just doesn't do anything for Bear. That said, we still need 2 more points to go. This is where the extra points are starting to come into play. There's a few different things you could go grab. You could start by getting Rejuve Swiftman to start moving down into Remove Corruption if you want to go that path. If you need the mob control, you can grab Hibernate and Typhoon. If you're just looking for something general and you're playing the Laser Bear build, so the Moonfire heavy based build, I'd say Nurturing Instinct at 6% extra damage on Moonfire. Not a bad choice at all. Ursol's Vortex, Innervate, Nature's Vigil. I think all 3 of these now, especially now that Innervate is usable in bear form, it's very, very valuable for the spec to have. So you can now grab all 3 of these, I think, very safely. And I think you grab Incap Roar and a point in Well-Honed Instincts. Of course, you're grabbing 3 Lucaris Teachings and Renewal. And then you basically have 2 points left to play with. And I think there's a couple of ways you can spend these last 2 points. You can grab the second point in Well-Honed Instincts to make it every 90 seconds versus every 120. You can grab Minute Roar on a fight like Taros, for example, where roughly every minute to minute and 15 seconds you're having to run out of the pie slice, essentially. You can, if you're the only druid, I think this is really important to have because you can basically roar your group on cooldown, save having to deal with a Warlock Gate. You just help with the group mobility. I use this on Taros because it's just, I think, a very valuable point to have. Even as Feral, but especially as Guardian, I think I'd be considering it as well. So you could put the point there and a point here. You could do a point in Minute Roar or Heart of the Wild. You could do Heart of the Wild, Well-Honed Instincts. You can come back up for Mythic Plus purposes. You can look into getting Hibernate and Typhoon if you feel like you need the mob control. Like there's all sorts of potential options. And even with like Dream of Cenarius, if you're running that side of the tree, you can come grab Forest Walk to give you the more movement speed and the more healing taken, since you're not getting natural recovery in this setup. So I'm going to leave these last 2 points alone because I think they're very flexible depending on what you want to do. You can even go throw them in like to Verdant Heart if you wanted to, so that you could get, that extra 20% healing while you have a cooldown up. Barkskin, of course, being potentially right now at 12 seconds, so you get 12 seconds of 20% extra healing. Just makes you a little bit easier on your healers to heal. Like there's all sorts of possibilities with these last 2 points. I think they're very, very flexible. All right. Now, because we took Nurturing Instinct, what we're going to do is we're going to look at like a full-on Laser Bear type build for Arcane. I think this build is going to be the best build for Mythic Plus. That's just my initial impressions without looking at anything. And as you can see, the tree has significantly changed. Instead of Survival Instincts being down here, it's moved up to row 2. So now you're required to take it. No matter what, like there's no way that you can skip it, which you shouldn't have been as Bear anyways, but now it's much easier to get without much in the way of like losing out on anything. Like it's a required point now. That said, Improved Survival Instincts is still here. I don't like that. I think it should be moved into Survival Instincts itself, but they want the symmetry on the tree right here to make it look like the bear paw, so gotta go here. That said, you still, front of the pack did move into a place to where it is completely optional. I don't think that unless you're really spread out, and there are fights where you potentially are really spread out. Diurna, for example, the penultimate boss of Vault, potentially on Razagath. I haven't seen too deep into that fight just yet, so I don't know for certain. But potential for this talent to be valuable, but I still think it's an extremely niche pick. Plus, with Brambles connecting to Innate Resolve, I think that now makes, Brambles still like a mandatory pick, but it now has even more things that it connects to. I'm also going to take Mangle just because, especially once 4-piece comes into play, getting that Mangle doing 20% extra damage against targets with Thrash on them is just going to be very valuable because Mangle's going to cleave. So I think overall it's just a really valuable talent to have come Mythic, come 4-piece, and it's just way better than Improved Survival Instincts. On row 4, I still think you take Innate Resolve because it's the best way to get down to both of these sides of the tree, and now it's 1 point, so it's much better. Of course, you're grabbing Berserk at the very minimum, and you need 1 more point to get down below the tree. I still think you ultimately take Gory Fur because you still want Survival of the Fittest and After the Wildfire, because these talents are still just very, very good. And then for pretty much all builds, you're going to want to grab Vulnerable Flesh in Tooth and Claw. That opens you up to the last row here, where for a Laser Bear build, you're still taking Fury of Nature, you're still taking Berserk Persistence because it's the best way down this side of the tree. But we need 3 more points to spend somewhere else. Now this is where the changes become really interesting, because normally you would have stuck them in like Flashing Claws, and then you would have had an extra point to put somewhere. Normally it would have been in Survival Instincts at this point in the tree. However, or maybe potentially even front of the packet or Infected Wounds, whatever the case may be. However, with Flashing Claws being moved down into further down right here into the tree, I think now we have some options and possibilities opened up as to where to spend these last 3 points to open up your gate. You could go a point into Vicious Cycle if you're like in a raid build, into Berserk, Unchecked Aggression, and Soul of the Forest to really focus in and hone in on that mangle damage. It might be worth doing once we get our full tier bonuses. This could be potentially an option that would be viable. And Mangle, of course, giving you that increased haste, which just means lower GCD, which means more Mangles, and potentially also with lower cost of Maul if you're berserking in an off-tank type position, where you don't need to lap your Iron Furs up. There's also the possibility in a more defensive build that you take Ursoc's Endurance to get the increased Iron Fur duration, and you get Layered Mane. Now, Layered Mane, I think, is only going to be an option if the second application of Iron Fur procs another talent down further in the tree. If it does, then I think Layered Mane becomes fairly valuable. If it doesn't, then I still think it's ultimately a dead talent. If it doesn't proc off the thing, I still think Ursoc's Endurance is a possibility, along with something like Vicious Cycle and Soul of the Forest, or Berserk, Unchecked Aggression, and Soul of the Forest. Like, these 3 points are all pretty flexible. I'm going to make the assumption that Thorns of Iron does proc off of the second application of Layered Mane for now. So I'm going to go ahead and put the 3 points there to open up the bottom part of the gate. Now for the Laser Bear build, of course, we're still taking Circle of Life and Death, as well as Elun's Favored, because you want that increased arcane damage and things of that nature. You're still taking Scintillating Moonlight. I think this is pretty much a must pick in all talent builds, even if you're not focusing heavily on arcane, particularly in single target raid builds. You still want that 10% DR just for having Moonfire on the target. Very, very effective defensive ability, and you're not really there's not really anything, in my opinion, that's truly better to have. Mythic Plus, you can take the Twin Moonfire talent in single target. I think it's a little bit of a debate right now. Galactic Guardian, you still absolutely pick. And I still think you absolutely pick Rage of the Sleeper. So we have 4 points left to spend in this tree. I think INCARN and Ursoc's Guidance are still very valuable, which means you have 2 points left to spend. Fury of the Lunar, Lunar Beam is now a capstone talent. I don't think it's really going to be worth the capstone ability. There's still some fundamental problems with Lunar Beam in that it doesn't move with you, and therefore if you have to move, then it's just not going to be there. And most fights in Mythic Plus you can kind of plant a little bit, but there are still plenty of fights where you're going to be moving around a lot. Or this expansion's favorite Mythic Plus boss feature, you have stuff that pushes you around. You have Heavy Winds, whatever the case may be, that's pushing you around. There's a boss in Algathar's that does it. There's a boss in Ruby Life Pools that does it. There's a couple of others that I can't think of off the top of my head that have these mechanics that kind of force you to move out and be in mobility. So you have to really time Lunar Beam very perfectly, which means having very, very, very much full fight awareness of what's going on in order for it to be valuable. I think that's too much for it to be a capstone ability, so I'm going to skip it in this build, and I'm going to take Moonless Night, because I think single target ability on an enemy afflicted by Moonfire is good. I think this is also a flex point. Mythic Plus, I think Twin Moonfire is just too good, because you can get the multiple Moonfires out, which means more DR on all of your targets. So Mythic Plus, which I think the Laser Bear build is really going to focus more heavily on, I think you take Twin Moonfire, and I'm going to take Thorns of Iron. Because you have INCARN and Ursoc's Guidance, of course you're going to be big time spamming Iron Fur. Every time you're going to Iron Fur, you're going to deal physical damage equal to 30% of your armor, split amongst all your enemies. I think this talent just has this synergy right here between Thorns of Iron and INCARN makes this talent really, really effective, especially on trash weeks where the pulls are going to be longer, so fortified weeks, or you're pulling really giga big with, you know, maybe you're combining Rage of the Sleeper and INCARN, or you going Rage of the Sleeper, INCARN, and then once Rage falls off, you combine it with Bark Skin, so that way you have a DR rolling plus a 30% stamina, plus you're constantly spamming Iron First, so you're getting big stacks of it. I've gotten as high as like 11 or 12, I think, already in this expansion. I just think there's some really, really nice synergies with Thorns of Iron and Incarnation that for Mythic Plus just end up being, I think, really, really hard to overlook. So on first impression, without really doing a lot of the math, without testing anything on PTR, because as of my last check, the servers still weren't up, I think this might be the best build that you're looking at come Mythic Plus. Like I said, we're not taking Protector of the Pack. We've got 2 flex points in the class tree that you can put literally anywhere that you want, which I think is really, really cool, really, really nice, and ultimately just kind of makes the tree feel like you can really tailor the gameplay into the way that you want it. For me, I'm probably going to just put it in Well-Honed Instincts and Minute Roar for raid purposes. Mythic Plus purposes, it depends on the dungeon, but there are some dungeons where Minute Roar feels really good because there is travel time. Other dungeons, maybe not so much because there isn't a lot of travel time, or the travel time can be offset by the fact that you can mount, thinking Algathar's Academy, for example, where there is significant travel time in between bosses, but you can mount up, so something like a Minute Roar is not going to help you. But something like, for example, Ruby Life pools, as you're going around the ring, for example, a Minute Roar can help you speed up the time between those pools because you'll have the roar up either every pool or every other pool that you do. You know, or a dungeon like Shadow Moon Burial Grounds where you can't roar at all, but there is some significant travel time. Having a Minute Roar can helpful to kind of just speed the group up and allow you to get through the dungeon much faster. And because we now have some flex points in the tree, this is a much easier option and niche pickup depending on the dungeon that you're doing for Mythic Plus purposes. And I think in raid purposes, it's very much a fight dependent thing. A fight like Taros, I think it's really, really valuable. But on a fight such as Kurug, where yeah, there's some mobility, but for the most part, you need as much healing optimization as you can get. Maybe something like putting a point into Forest Walk, or going and grabbing, you know, going down maybe this part of the tree and grabbing Natural Recovery, or grabbing Well-Honed Instincts, or even going Heart of the Wild, to where if you're off tanking, you can quickly bounce out and do maybe some quick off healing if you want to go that path with it. Like, there's some really potential options here, but I think Minute Roar is kind of like a safe pick to have. So again, without really testing anything, without really digging into the numbers on this, just kind of like a feely craft thing, I think this might be your best sort of laser bear build. There is some flex points here for raid purposes as well if you like to play this build in raid. I think something like Twin Moonfire can be sacrificed for Moonless Night. Other talents, let's see, I don't really think you move anything else. I think these 3 points, again, layered main is going to depend entirely on, does Thorns of Iron proc off the extra layered main stacks that you're getting? If the answer is yes, then layered main becomes a very valuable pick. If the answer is no, then I think you take these 2 points out of layered main and move them onto like Vicious Cycle or Soul of the Forest, and you probably even pull it out of Ursock's Endurance to grab Unchecked Aggression or something along those lines. So there is some flex points in the tree, kind of depending on what the results of our testing will be. Once I find out, or once someone else is able to find out and I get the information, I'll post it either on my Twitter, on my Discord, so you can follow me there, or just follow the Dream Grove Discord as well. Check on the bear stuff. Like, I'll try to do posts and updates and stuff like that. Twitter's probably going to be the best place for that. Now, there is another playstyle build that I think becomes really a real viable potential option here because of some of the changes that have been made, and that's a Dream of Cenarius build. Now, the Laser Bear build, personally, I think that's going to be my pick because I love the Laser Bear build. You know, obviously really strong arcane damage, so you're going to benefit a lot from having a Demon Hunter with you. Get that extra 5% spell damage on top of all the boosts that you're already getting to Moonfire. It's going to make Moonfire a really potent ability in your kit. However, there is a build that makes Moonfire more of a maintenance buff that you want, or maintenance debuff that you put on a target for Twin Moonfire, or for Scintillating Moonlight purposes, and you focus more heavily on things like your physical damage. Now, the Laser Bear build does have the advantage of having constant trickling healing after the Wildfire being a burst heal, along with things like renewal and Frenzied Regeneration still being, of course, very important as part of the build. But there is a physical damage build that's going to rely on more absorb-based shields and more sort of specific burst healing. Now, this does change the class tree a little bit, but let's fill out the spec tree first, and we'll kind of talk about it. This is what I'm going to call the Dream of Cenarius, or the Fizz damage build. So the top of the tree doesn't change. You're still grabbing the same talents here across the board at the top with Frenzied Regen, and particularly here, Regrowth on your healing on yourself is going to be really important. Innate Resolve, I think, is a mandatory pick as part of this build, but Innate Resolve is also just generally one of the best talent picks in the top of this tree to get down to the second level of the tree. So like, it's just a good talent pick. That said, you're still going to come over here and grab After the Wildfire, and I think you go to Berserk Persistence, and then you stop there on this side of the tree. You're still going to grab Tooth and Claw, and you're going to grab Berserk Unchecked Aggression. And then you have 2 points here that you can kind of do, or you still have 4 points to spend here. So I think there's some definite options. I think this build ends up being a little bit better in Raid. So something like Vicious Cycle, I think, becomes much more valuable because of the way Ursock's Fury works. And then I think you can still put a point in something like Soul of the Forest, especially once you start getting that additional 25% damage. And then we have 2 more points to spend. Again, Layered Mane becomes a real option here, but I still think you ultimately take Fury of Nature because it's just the simplest damage boost. Even though you're only going this far down to get Scintillating Moonlight because of the 10% damage reduction, you know, you're still maintaining a Moonfire, so it might as well hit. But this build focuses much more on this side of the tree. So I think you're going to grab Flashing Claws, you're grabbing Ursock's Fury, you're grabbing Rend and Tear, grabbing Blood Frenzy, Dream of Cenarius, and I think you grab the new talent Raise because it does physical damage in front of you, and it's just a good ability to have to kind of flesh out the kit, using it every 40, it's just 40 rage. It's another spender that you can do in place of Mangle. Now, Raise, it's going to be interesting because Raise is a talent that uses rage but isn't impacted by Ursock's Fury. I wonder if that's an oversight. I might tweet the devs and see if they look at it or give a response to it. But Raise is going to be one of those things that's going to depend entirely upon tuning and if they add it to Ursock's Fury. My gut tells me that they won't. So if they don't, then something like Circle of Life and Death is going to still be a very valuable talent pick. And then you have, 1 point left to spend at the bottom of the tree. You can grab a 3-minute Incarn if you'd like. I think even Convoke might have some potency here, but also Thorns of Iron I think still has some value in this build as well. So again, another flex point that you can have somewhere else in this tree. You can grab Ursock's Endurance if you want a little more defensive capability. Like, there's some options here in the tree itself. I'm going to go Thorns of Iron just because it does the most damage while also providing defensive benefit because you're applying Iron Fur. So what does this build do? This build focuses heavily on Thrash and Maul in particular, and potentially Raise depending on its tuning and how it interacts potentially with other talents. And what this build does is this focuses on more consistent absorb shields through Ursock's Fury while giving you burst healing with Dream of Cenarius and After the Wildfire. Of course, Dream of Cenarius, anyone that's not familiar with the talent, here it is. Basically, you get a chance when you take basically direct damage, so not dot damage, but direct hits from a boss or from mobs, where you get a chance equal to your crit strike chance. So this makes crit a little bit more valuable in your stat priority than it does for the Laser Bear build, which focuses heavily on haste versus mastery type builds. Dream of Cenarius now makes it so that mastery may take a little bit of a backseat and you get more focus into crit. Basically, this talent, in my view, again, not really having done the math on it, this talent I think really takes crit and makes it just so that in reality you just take eye level on most any upgrade and you're gonna have value out of it because now you're getting something out of all 4 talents. But you get a chance equal to your crit strike chance to cause your next regrowth to heal for an additional 200%, be instant free and castable in all forms for 30 seconds. Cannot occur more than once every 20 seconds. Now, I'm sure there are class packages that track this, or you can make your own weak aura to see when you get the Dream of Cenarius proc. So what this does is this allows you to have a big burst sort of Word of Glory style heal on yourself, or potentially even on your co-tank or whatever the case may be. Like, there is some skill gameplay that can be involved with Dream of Cenarius, but it just, I think for most cases, if you're actively tanking, you're going to use it on yourself. Combined with After the Wildfire on every 200 rage, getting that big burst healing that flares out, and you're going to have these big bursts of healing But because you're much more Thrash and Maul focused, you're going to have Ursoc's Fury's Absorb Shield up way more often than obviously you do with the Laser Bear build, where you don't even take the talent. Now, because of that, your class tree changes. Your class tree does change up a little bit, in my opinion. In this case, you're not taking Nurturing Instinct, but we need 2 points to get down into the bottom, down into the third part of the tree. Now here, your 2 points that you can spend, I think, can go in a variety of places. Hibernate Typhoon for mob control. You can put a point in Verdant Heart, and then in like Typhoon, because I know there's a few places like in Noka, there's mobs that do a big heavy mortal strike that reduce your healing by 60%. So being able to Typhoon Ursol's, Typhoon and then Ursol's them to allow yourself to kite is going to be really effective in dungeons like that. And then of course Frenzied Regeneration and Bark Skin just increases that healing that you're taking in. So just a way to kind of help your healer out and make you a little bit more tanky. Now with this build, you take your 3 points in Lucar's Teachings, you take Ursol's Vortex, and you're going to take Incap Roar, 2 points in Well-Honed Instincts, and you're going to take Protector of the Pack down here. Now, Protector of the Pack, if you don't play any of the other non-resto specs, basically all the damage that you do, it takes 5% of that damage and stores it as a buff on you. And then when you regrowth, it will consume all that stored damage that you've done into healing on that regrowth. So what you can do is you can really build this up. And when you get a Dream of Cenarius proc and you cast that instant regrowth on yourself, not only you're getting 200% additional healing on whatever the regrowth amount is going to be, it's storing this, which if you hold it for a while, it stores infinitely. It doesn't have a timer. It just keeps going and going and going and going and going. So I've had cases where I've stored up to like 15 or 20,000 damage as Feral, and maybe a little less so as Guardian. But storing 20,000 damage and getting an extra 20,000 healing on my regrowth, I mean, it's basically saved my life in a few cases. But for Bear in particular, this means not only are you getting this heavy potential burst out of Dream of Cenarius, and you're getting this heavy potential burst out of After the Wildfire. You basically, if you can time it and hold Dream of Cenarius, through its 30-second window and really use it to save yourself when you're at low health or even at like starting to get into those danger levels, you have this big burst of healing that you're going to be able to do to keep yourself alive and make you very sustainable in long duration fights, or on fights where your healer's starting to gas themselves out with mana, even after you've tried to innervate them. Now you have 3 talent points left to spend here. What I would probably do is grab Renewal to give you even more sustain, grab Innervate since it's now castable in bear form, and grab Nature's Vigil. This makes you kind of an off-healing machine for yourself. So you're going to be able to Nature's Vigil, which allows you to heal friendly targets for the damage that you're doing. It's 20% of the damage that you do for all single target damage abilities. So your Tooth and Claw proc mauls are going to heal someone for, I've had them heal for up to 15,000 health on a nearby target, which, that's 15,000 health now that the healer doesn't have to heal. Now, when our health pools are in the multiple hundreds of thousands, it doesn't seem like a lot, but any little bit does help. And healers are very much appreciative of it. And because it's on a 90-second cooldown, just the first damage event, you fire it, and you fire it on cooldown every time thereafter. And you just can do a lot of extra healing for your party. Innervate, obviously, help your healers out. I think both in Raid and in Mythic Plus, depending on the healer, this is going to find a lot of value. But again, depending on the types of pulls that you're doing, Innervate might be a really good thing to give to your healer, even if they're only at 80%. If you know you're going to be in a long protracted, like there's some bosses that are on Tyrannical are going to take forever, and your healer having an Innervate during those fights are going to be really nice. So I think this build does have some viable potential. I think it's going to be better suited to a raid build, but I do think there is some potential in Mythic Plus for it. Is a more physical damage based build. Now overall, I really like the changes that the tree has made. It really kind of helps diversify the play styles a little bit. Here, obviously, with a raid build, you're looking more at like a 15. You've got your big cooldown every 3 minutes, but in between that, you're hoping that your damage is pretty sustaining. It sustains pretty well, and then every 3 minutes, you're going to basically be somewhat unkillable. Now, there are some points to be spent in this tree potentially where you can just grab INCARN on a 3-minute cooldown versus Thorns of Iron. I think that's a really very much a viable pick. You need Fury of Nature in order to get down to the tree, so I don't think it's skippable unless you want to spend points into Ursoc's in Layered Main. I think that is a possibility here as well to get those 2 points. So you have Ursoc's Endurance, or even the second charge of Survival Instincts or something along those lines to allow yourself to go. Or you can even do Reinvigoration to reduce your Frenzied Regen cooldown for like very defensive purposes. There is definitely some variety in this tree that I think are going to have to be played around with and can kind of be tailored more to your personal preferences more than anything else. That said, I love the fact that Druid seems to have two very divergent playstyles with itself now in these PTR builds, at least on paper it does. We'll need to get in and start doing some testing in dungeons and just generally on training dummies and things like that in order to get a real feel for it. But I really like the way this tree was set up. It was done in a way that very much surprised me. I didn't think it was going to be kind of this well thought out when they did it. I kind of thought they would just kind of slap some stuff onto the original build and really still keep some of the fundamental problems with the trees out there. But the additional connections and the reshuffling of the tree to make it look like a bear paw, I think allowed them to really kind of flex some creative muscle with how they can kind of see some build diversity being played out. And I just want to give shout outs to Blizzard for that. I really like the way these trees are laid out in comparison. Are they perfect? I don't think so, but I think all 38 specs in the game could say that their spec tree needs some work still. And there's things that people would like to see that are more personal taste. But a lot of the fundamental issues that I've had with Guardian's trees mostly are solved. And for that, thank you, Blizzard. But if you are a Guardian player, I want to know what you think about this new tree setup and what are build playstyles that you're potentially really looking forward to. What are some things that you may disagree with me about? I'd love to talk about it in the comments below, so make sure you comment, you like, share, subscribe, share it with your bear friends or anyone that's interested in playing a tank. And bear seems to be something that is catching them because bear is actually considered broadly by the community to be a very solid tank, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, maybe I want to try Guardian Druid. Share it with them, let them know kind of what we're thinking about as we go through, what I'm thinking about, if you agree with me. So I appreciate you all for sticking with me again. Another 30-minute banger, a long one. One of these days I will learn how to keep these videos short, but I really like I just really get nerdy about bear. Sorry. So I'll cut this off and end this here now. So thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much if you've watched all the way to this point. I appreciate you greatly. You mean a lot to me if you've come this far. Until the next video, I hope you're all staying safe. I hope you're all enjoying yourself. You're having fun. You keep on gaming, and I will see you all in the next video.